If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe to the channel. And if you're enjoying these stories, there's a link below to buy me a cup of coffee. This is the Chassidic Story Project with Barak Hullman, podcasting from Jerusalem, Israel. This podcast is sponsored by listeners just like you. To become a supporter of this podcast, please go to HasidicStory.com. HASIDIC story.com. You'll never know. You'll never know. You'll never know. You'll never know. Shalom Aleichem, my sweetest friends. It is Rosh Chodesh Elul as I'm recording the stories today. And this week I have two stories for you, Be'ezrat Hashem. But before I begin, I want to dedicate this podcast episode to the continued success of our soldiers in battle wherever they are, the returning of all the hostages healthy and alive, the refuah shlema, the full recovery of everybody who's been injured or who is ill, the comforting of those that lost loved ones, and the continued unity of the Jewish people here in the land of Israel and all around the world. The first story is a story told by Reb Shlomo Karlebach, of course, and I'm always a little hesitant to tell Shlomo's stories because he did such a beautiful job. But a couple of things. First of all, Shlomo is no longer around physically, and he doesn't have a podcast. And Baruch Hashem, I am around physically, and I do have a podcast with many tens of thousands of listeners, sometimes over 100,000 listeners a month. And so I feel it's fitting to retell a story from Reb Shlomo in my own way, of course, which is kind of the goal of this podcast, besides bringing the stories, is to tell the stories. And as everybody knows, probably if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, I'm now in the final stages of the Baal Shem Tov book. All of the stories are fully written, fully edited, completely ready for print. I'm just going over the last draft before I get to that stage. And you could ask yourself, why do we need another book of Baal Shem Tov stories? Aren't there enough Baal Shem Tov stories out there? And of course there are. You also don't need me telling stories. All of the stories that I'm telling are printed or online, except for, of course, my personal stories. So I'm not bringing anything new, but what I am bringing new is how I tell the stories. And so, even though Reb Shlomo told the story, and he is my model for telling stories, this story, however it comes out, is told by me. Like the kids here in Israel say, Ma sheyotze ani merutze. Whatever comes out, I'm happy with that. So, Be'ezrat Hashem. Now, one more thing before I start the story. The reason I'm telling this story is because there's a listener of the podcast that came to me Friday night after davening, and he asked me to tell a story about shidduchim. And even though I have some nice stories about shidduchim, this is one of my favorite stories. And so I figured, because he asked, I'm happy to share. Everybody knows, for sure, everybody who listens to this podcast knows about the great Rebbe, the seer of Lublin, the Lubliner Rebbe, Rabbi Yaakov Yitzchak Horovitz, who lived from 1745 to 1815. And of all the Rebbes, he was one of the biggest ones. He was a student of the Maggid of Mezrich and Rabbi Elimelech of the Jenks. And the seer Lublin was also called the Chose in Hebrew. Why was he called the seer? Because he was able to see from one end of the world to the other, into the past, into the future, and not just what was happening right now, but what needed to happen for souls to do their tikkun, to do their fixing in this world. And there was a simple, good-hearted Jew, whose name was Yankel, a little Yiddale, came to the holy Lubina Rebbe and said, Rebbe, my wife and I have been married for 18 years and we still don't have any children. Can you please bless us or give me some advice? Tell me what to do. And the holy Lubina Rebbe saw right away what this couple needed to do in order to have children. You know, sometimes Hashem is waiting for us to show how much we really want something, how much we're willing to sacrifice for it. The seer Lubin says to Yankel, go back home and make an accounting of everything you own, down to the feathers in your pillows, and then come back here and tell me what it's worth. So Yankel went back home, made an accounting of everything, and he came back and he said it's worth exactly 10,000 rubles. So the seer Lubin said, okay, now you're going to go home and ask your wife if she agrees to sell everything. If she agrees and you have the 10,000 rubles in your hand, come back here and I'll tell you what to do. Seer Lubin was basically telling them to bankrupt themselves. Sure, they would have the cash, but who knew what the Seer Lubin wanted them to do with the cash? But the Rebbe knew that sometimes to receive the greatest blessings, we need to create first an empty vessel. A short while later, Yankel comes back to the Rebbe, and he said, I asked my wife if we're ready to be poor in order to have children, and their answer was, what good are all these possessions without a child? So we sold everything like you said, down to the feathers in our pillows. My wife is now a maid, living in someone's house. Here's the money, Rebbe, what am I supposed to do? And now the Rebbe sat Yankel down and he said, listen, Yankel, we have to have a serious talk now. It's a matter of life and death. And Yankel sat down, and the Rebbe said to him, before you married your wife, do you remember that you were engaged to someone else? And Yankel said, sure, I was engaged to Chayaleah. And the Rebbe said, and do you remember what happened? You broke off the engagement very quickly, but then 4 months later you got engaged to your wife and you got married. And Yankel said, right, Rebbe, it's exactly true. That's exactly how it happened. And the Rebbe said, that woman, Chayaleah, she suffered enormously. And you won't be able to have children until you've obtained her forgiveness. And Yankel says, but Rebbe, that was 18 years ago. I have no idea where she is. And then he realizes who he's sitting in front of. He says, but you, as the seer of Lublin, who has clear vision that can see from one end of the world to the other, if you could tell me where she is, I will go right away and ask for her forgiveness. So the Lubliner looked Yankel in the eye, and he said, very well, I'll tell you where she is. You're going to go to the fair in Leipzig, take your 10,000 rubles, and there you will find her. Of course, the fair in Leipzig, in Germany, was one of the most important commercial gatherings in all of Europe. It ran for 3 months of the year, and Jewish and non-Jewish merchants from all over Europe would come to gather there and trade. And Yankel went to Leipzig and looked for Chayaleah everywhere. For 3 months, day and night, he walked the streets. He searched the face of every woman buying or selling, every merchant in the marketplace, but he could not find her. He was so desperate. Every place that he was, he thought she has to be someplace else. And no sooner do you get up from one cafe, you're sure she's in another. He ran over to every woman that was her height, certain it was Chayaleah, because of course the seer of the Blin told him that she would be there. And he sold everything, and he had all this money, not for nothing. He was going to find Chayaleah, but every time he was disappointed when it was a stranger who turned around. And after 3 months, he was going out of his mind. The fair was over. He was exhausted. He was miserable. And Yankel was walking the streets. On the last afternoon, people were already taking down their tents, but still he had not found Chayaleah. And then there was a sudden thunderstorm, and the strong rain sent him running for cover. He took shelter under an awning, and as he's standing there waiting for the rain to stop, a very beautiful young woman, also seeking shelter from the rain, came under the canopy, and he stepped aside to make room for her. This young girl looked at him with dark, penetrating eyes, and she says to him, why is it whenever I come close to you, you move away? He looks over. Gewalt! It's Chayaleah! Chayaleah, who he'd been looking for 3 months. For a long moment, she just looked at him, and then very quietly she said, I can't believe that after all these years, we're meeting here. Yankel was so shocked he was just silent, and Chayaleah said, I heard that you got married. Do you have children? And Yankel fell to the ground, and he said, Chayaleah, please, for Hashem's sake, please forgive me for breaking my engagement with you. I know I did wrong, and because of that, I can't have children. Please forgive me, Chayaleah. I know it was so long ago, but please forgive me. And Chayaleah said, it's true. 18 years is a very long time, a lifetime. She said, okay, I will forgive you on the condition that you do me a favor in return. And Yankel said, anything, whatever you say. The seer Lublin sent me here, and he told me to sell everything. I have 10,000 rubles. Anything you say. She said, my brother is marrying off his daughter in exactly 1 week. He still lives in the same village in Lithuania where we grew up, but he doesn't have a single penny for the wedding. Buy yourself the best horse you can find. If you need switch horses along the way, you have to get there before the wedding, and the moment you hand him 7,000 rubles for the wedding, I will forgive you. Now, we don't know what it is to ride a horse from Leipzig to Lithuania, but in those days, a person would have to literally eat, sleep, and pray on the horse all week long in order to arrive on time. It was a journey of over 1,000 miles on difficult terrain, but Yankel had no choice. He said to Chayaleah, I'll do it. And then Chayaleah started to walk away, just as suddenly as she had come in, and Yankel cried out to her and said, wait, Chayaleah, it's dark and it's raining. Can I walk with you somewhere? And Chayaleah laughed a little strange laugh and shook her head, and she said, no, Yankel, where I go, you can't follow. Yankel had no time to lose. He went out, bought himself the best horse he could find, and left Leipzig. And day and night he rode, praying on the saddle that he would get to the village before the wedding. And Baruch Hashem, even though it was so hard, he was lucky. He arrived at his hometown in the morning and found that he still remembered where Chaya Leah's brother lived. The brother in the meantime was at his wit's end, trying to get ready for the wedding, but he had no money. And he was so stressed the wedding was supposed to be that day. And in those days, if you didn't have a proper dowry, a Jewish girl couldn't get married. And suddenly, a man splattered with mud, stinking, looking like a mess, comes running into Chaya Leah's brother's house and says, Baruch Hashem, I made it on time. I brought you the money for the wedding. Now the brother thought that this stranger was playing with him. He said, please, I don't have any energy for crazy people like you today. And my house is dirty, but you're making it worse. I want to clean it up for my daughter, so please get out of here with your smell and your mud. And Yankel says, no, I really came to help you. And the brother says, sure, you and all the schleppers in this town, have a little compassion. I have enough of my own problems. I don't have the energy for yours. And then Yankel said, but Chaya Leah, your sister, sent me to you. Why won't you listen to me? And then the brother, his name was Shimon, he stopped and he looked at Yankel and he said, what did you just say? Did you say my sister Chaya Leah? And Shimon's face was pale and he said to Yankel, listen, I don't know who you are or what kind of cruel joke this is, but my sister died 18 years ago. And Yankel sat down and he said, that can't be true. And Shimon said, of course it's true. My daughter is named after her, the daughter that's getting married today. And if you don't believe it, go to the cemetery and look for yourself. And then Yankel says, Shimon, you don't recognize me. I was your sister's fiancé all those years ago. And then the brother looked at Yankel's face more closely and he said, yeah, I remember you. After you broke your engagement with my sister, she became so sad and sick. She was so in love with you, she wouldn't eat. And the night that you married that other woman, she left this world, broken-hearted because of you. And Yankel said, but that's impossible. I just saw her. I just spoke with her. And the brother said, you saw my sister where? And he said, in Leipzig. And she's the one that told me to bring this money to you. And Yankel told the brother the whole story, how the Lubliner Rebbe had sent him to Leipzig with all the money, how he'd searched for months, and how Chaya Leah had appeared to him in the rain on the last afternoon of the fair, and she said to bring the money and she would forgive him. And Yankel gave Chaya Leah's brother 7,000 rubles, and it paid for the entire wedding and the dowry. And shortly after he returned to Lublin, his wife became pregnant with their first child. There's a teaching from the Ishbitzer Rebbe in the name of the seer Lublin, in the name of Eliyahu Navi. It says when you really want to ask somebody for forgiveness with all your heart, you can bring them back from the other world. And it works for shidduchim as well, my sweetest friends. If you know with all your heart that your soulmate is in this world, then you can bring your beshert and you together from the far corners of the earth. Yankel had been searching for 3 months amongst the living, but Chaya Leah was waiting for him to truly seek her forgiveness. It was only on the last day when he'd given everything that Hashem allowed them to meet under the awning in that rain. Where I go you can't follow, she said. But where she had gone, his tshuva, his sincere apology, could reach. And this is the miracle of how soulmates meet, and how forgiveness heals across all worlds, and how a broken engagement can be fixed even after death. May we all merit, especially in the month of Elul, to seek forgiveness with such sincerity that Hashem bends himself to help us. And may we find our soulmates through the mysterious way that souls connect across all the world. have another story for you. This is a story that a friend of mine, Rabbi Alon Silberg, tells every year at the beginning of Elul. Everybody knows the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shner Zalman of Liadi, who was the first Rebbe of Chabad, who lived from 1745 to 1812, almost the exact same years as the seer Lublin. The Alter Rebbe brings down a beautiful teaching about the month of Elul. He says that during Elul, before Rosh Hashanah, we have HaMelech Basadeh. The king is in the field. And what does this mean? Throughout the year, if you want to see a king, you need to go to the palace. You need permission. You need the right clothes. You have to go through the guards and protocols. But there's a time when the king leaves his palace and goes out into the fields where the people work, and there anyone can approach him. The farmer in his work clothes, the shepherd with his flock, anyone. And the king receives each person with a big smile, with joy and an open heart. And that's part of the month of Elul. The King of Kings, the Ribono Shel Olam, comes out of his hidden chambers in heaven and makes himself available to us right where we are. And here's a story that happened in our own times that teaches this so well. Queen Elizabeth II of England, who passed away in 2022, used to spend every late summer and early autumn, which is exactly the time of Elul, at her castle in Scotland, as they said when I was in Edinburgh. And Balmoral Castle, as it's called in the Scottish Highlands. And this has been the royal family's Scottish home since Queen Victoria bought it in 1852. The Queen loved to walk among the hills and the paths around the castle, dressed not in her royal clothes, but in simple country clothes, a headscarf, a tweed skirt, and walking shoes. And she would walk for hours throughout the countryside, just her and usually a bodyguard, what they called her protection officer. And this is a true story that her former bodyguard, Richard Griffin, shared after the Queen passed away in 2022. He had served as her bodyguard for over 30 years, and in the story he said, it showed perfectly who she really was. One day during the month of Elul, which the world calls September, the Queen was walking with Mr. Griffin, and both were dressed simply like any Scottish country folk out for a walk. They were walking along a public path near Balmoral, and there were two American tourists that approached them. And they said, "Excuse me, do you live around here?" And the Queen said, "Yes." And the tourists got very excited. They said, "How wonderful. We heard that the Queen sometimes walks here among the people. Have you ever seen her?" And the Queen could have said, "Yes, I'm the Queen." But instead, she got this little twinkle in her eye. She was known for a sense of humor. And she points to her bodyguard, Mr. Griffin, and said, "I haven't, but he sees her regularly." The tourists were so excited. Here was somebody who actually knew the Queen personally. They turned to the bodyguard with such excitement, and they said, "You've met the Queen? What's she like?" Mr. Griffin, understanding the game perfectly, played along, and he said, "Oh, she has a lovely sense of humor." And then the American said to the bodyguard, "Would you take a picture with us? Our friends back home will never believe that we met someone who knows the Queen." And of course he said, "So who took the picture?" The Queen of England herself. She took their camera and photographed these American tourists with her bodyguard, making sure to get a good picture, checking the framing, making sure everyone was smiling. And then Mr. Griffin said, "Would you like me to take a picture of you and this lady here as well?" And they said, "Sure, why not? That would be very nice." And they stood next to the Queen with big smiles on their faces, arms friendly around each other, having absolutely no idea who was standing right next to them. They chatted with each other for another moment and then thanked them for their kindness and continued on their walk, so happy that they had met somebody who actually knew the Queen. And after the two of them watched the tourists walk away, the Queen turns to Mr. Griffin with that famous twinkle in her eye and said, "I'd love to be a fly on the wall when they get home and someone tells them who's in that picture." And of course, a few weeks later, when they got back to America and showed their pictures to their friends, someone must have looked at that photo and said, "Wait a minute. Do you know who that is standing next to you?" Can you imagine that moment, the shock, the disbelief, double-checking the photo, the realization that they had been walking with the Queen, talking with the Queen, that the Queen herself had taken the picture, and they didn't even know it? This, my sweetest friends, is the perfect mashal, the perfect analogy for what the Alter Rebbe was trying to teach us about Elul. During this month, the King of Kings is not sitting on his heavenly throne. You don't need special schuyot, merits to approach him. He's not behind the pagod, the heavenly curtain. Not in the Holy of Holies where only the high priest could enter once a year. No, he's right here, walking amongst us in the field of our everyday lives, in our offices, in the stores, in our homes, in our struggles, and in our joy. Dressed, so to speak, in the simple clothes of ordinary existence. And those American tourists, they got exactly what they came for. They met the Queen. They talked with her. She was gracious to them. She even served them by taking their picture. The Queen was completely available, completely present, but they didn't recognize her because they were looking for a crown. They were looking for the royal robes and scepters and ceremony. They weren't looking for a simple woman in a headscarf, walking in the Scottish hills. And this is exactly what Elul is. The Ribono Shel Olam is right here with us, but he comes out in simple clothes, so to speak, in ordinary moments, and the person that needs our help, and the small voice that says, maybe it's time to apologize to somebody who you hurt. The king is in the field, but do we recognize him? Are we like those tourists, not realizing that he's walking beside us every day? The Queen of England could have said, I'm the Queen, but she didn't. She let the tourists have their encounter with her gently, and so too does Hashem. He doesn't force himself on us. But during the month of Elul, he makes himself approachable, but we have to have the eyes to see it. The tourists will always tell this story, we met the Queen and we didn't even know it, but at least they have the picture to prove it. And the Alter Rebbe promises that during Elul, Hashem smiles to everyone that approaches him. May we all merit to recognize the King when he's still in the field, to approach him just as we are in our everyday lives, or even better, after we've done the fixing and the tshuva that we know that we need to do. May we realize, if not today, then very soon, that we were actually walking with the King all along. What a gift we have in the month of Elul. The King is in the field, my sweetest friends. Don't let Elul pass by without taking the walk with the King. Thank you so much for listening, as always, my sweetest friends. I hope everybody has a beautiful Chodesh, good preparation for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and the holidays to come after. And of course, thank you to all of the listeners of the podcast and all of the supporters of the podcast. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. And thank you for listening. And I hope you have a beautiful Shabbos and a beautiful week. And until next week, my sweetest friends, take care of yourselves. And sei gesund. And he stood next to the Queen.